So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshua the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. Let's read then a portion of Yeshua the prophet related with the 61st chapter, where then the Messiah himself completed the spring feast, or the part A of the 61st chapter. And then the Messiah, while he was reading the Holy Megillah, he did not read part B regarding Leviticus the 23rd chapter, or then the autumn feast. But let's then obviously read the prophecy related with Yeshayahu chapter 1:8. Explains very precisely where then the first holy city of the time of the restoration period should be at. Prior of exploring this particular topic, let's understand a holy Hebrew word of reflected. The reflection does not mean a metal plate, shiny metal plate in the Holy of Holies or in a holy place, where then the priest would stare at himself, make sure he had no sin. There is no relation with this section. But it does have a relation of the holy instructions, the Hebraic holy instructions, then reflected in the future. Let's then understand a point. When we are then in a factory, you have then, for instance, the prototype. Let's say you have a model of a product you can obviously produce. You produce thousands of these particular product based from a prototype. Now let's say we are producing these in, let's say for instance, in the 30s. You have the model, you have the prototype, then you produce. On a date of production, you have obviously the year 30. If we take the same prototype and we produce this same object in the 90s, you have to change the year while then maintaining its integrity as the product. However, on a date you have to use 90 rather than 30. The product is the same, it has its use in the 30s, and also it has its use on the 90s. The only change was the year. When we read the holy instructions from the Tzayelic lineage, and we read prophecies of Yeshayahu, the similitude is absolutely evident. Daniel, when we read, for instance, the chapters related with the restoration period, sections of these, we find then very precisely when then the prophecies of Daniel were taking place during his time as he was reading it, and then the actual time where the prophecy was completed versus the reflection in the future. So let's try to understand again. The prototype in a certain year does its job. Then there is the reflection of these same product, for instance, 60 years later. Yes, does its same work. The reflections of the holy instructions are similar. When we read, for instance, areas of Daniel, at some point, for instance, if you read from the 10th chapter, you find in the Greco country on the 21st verse. When we read these from the time of Daniel, when the prophecy was taking place under this country, we must reflect and leave the bulk of the understanding project in the future and changed the name. It's no longer the Greco country but China, because the area where then the first prophecy was at and completed reflected in the future, and then only changed the name. The 10th chapter of Daniel is absolutely a prayer regarding then what nation would lead then the base of the statue of Daniel, the 2nd chapter. As Daniel had the dream, he saw then the base of the statue was a mixture of iron and clay. And then Daniel knew there was a special period of time where he couldn't say precisely who is going to lead this period of time. He knew that the head of gold was the king of Babylon. He knew then later on would be the Medes and the Persians, and then obviously Alexander the Great, and then obviously came then the irons, or the legs of iron, or the iron pieces, would be Rome. And then the base was a mixture. He didn't understand what it was. Then he set himself to pray, and he found the answer. However, you have then this understanding taking place prior when then the 1,000 years of the Messiah ended. So let's then talk about reflection one more time. Before the end of the 1,000 years of the Messiah, let's understand, for instance, Gog and Magog, sections of the end of times. We know when we read reference regarding Gog and Magog, it was then the model or the prototype of the ending of a period as if the world was ending. What does it mean? The holy cities of the Messiah were around for 1,000 years, ever since his ascension. Roughly then 100 years later, Yohanan the Shaliach, he was a true Shaliach from the lineage of Abraham, a true Hebrew of Hebrews. He was the last Shaliach of the period of the Messiah. He went to the land of Cush. That's why the holy prophet Yeshua explained very precisely. And when we read, we don't understand the layers. We are not reading only Yeshua the prophet, chapter 1:8. You are reading layers, as if you were taking the project of the 1930s prototype and the 90s prototype, and you placed one on the top of the other, and you read as one. You can't make a distinction of 30s and 90s, because at first glance you think it's a project. When we read chapter 1:8 of Yeshua, he's speaking of a couple of times. Yohanan went there and he established the first holy city as per the instructions of Moses and per the instructions of Yahweh Yeshua. The spring feast. We find these spring feasts in Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, from the 1st verse through the 21st verse. Those are then Moadim. The Hebrews practiced these feasts for more than 1,000 years. When the Messiah came, he completed the spring feast. Then he went down. He went down to Sheol, and he remained there for 72 hours, and he saw the souls of those people in torment. And he came back. Later on, he reported what he saw down there. It was not very nice. But the Messiah kept for himself, and when he came back from the dead, he taught his people for a year. Because a area of time worth was then a period where the Messiah then explained section by section of the Torah. He had to conquer death first, to take the fear away from the people, because they were scared of obeying the Torah, because they were away from obedience for many years. While the Messiah was completing the spring feast prior of his death on a stake, then the people were afraid. When he died on the stake, and then the Most Holy was anointed, as per the instructions of Daniel chapter 9, the west side of the Ark of the Covenant was then anointed. The Ark of the Covenant was in the cave of Yirmiyahu. Precisely then he was nailed on a stake on top. The rock split, went down his holy dam, and anointed the west side of the Ark of the Covenant. Then the Messiah went down to Sheol for 72 hours and came back. Then he spent a year with his people, teaching them very precisely what they must do as per the instructions of Moses, and he did explain that half of the Torah, half of the prophets were then completed. He completed the spring feast. Then he stayed with his people for a year. But he kept his understanding and his knowledge of Sheol for the end. For nearly a year, the land was prosperous beyond measure. Then it was time for him to depart. At this time when the Messiah was on the earth, during this year, there was no requirement of having a holy city around. However, when the Messiah then ascended, then the Shilishim went out and they formed holy cities. When the Messiah ascended, then the Shilishim, obviously, they were around teaching the people, showing them the spring feast was completed. And Ruach HaKodesh was active. The promise of the Messiah saying, you don't be dismayed, then he's going up, and then comes down from there another person, a spirit, Ruach HaKodesh. He's going then to show them and guide them as precisely as the Messiah then taught. Then, what went on? A bit shortly prior of his ascension, the Messiah began to lay down the truth. Have it in mind, at this time the land was very prosperous. There were trade, there were caravans, and coming camels of many parts of many other kingdoms coming in. There was joy in the land. Then the Messiah began the explanation regarding then, if a man gives his soul in exchange for the pleasures of this world, then the soul is lost. Have this in mind. The Messiah said at some point, he said, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons at this point. It was prior of his death. When he explained, for instance, Mitchiyahu, he was a Levi, was a priest. When he explained then, the 24th chapter of Mitchiyahu, then he was after he came from the dead. You understand then when it's prior and after. As he was explaining what he experienced down there, then the people were afraid and angry, because they thought the time of the restoration was during their time. And the Messiah said, no, this is not it. The reason why they are having so many of these prosperities is because to show them what the new world is going to be. So then, many people were angry. When the Messiah ascended, there was persecution on the land, because the Shilishim and those who were obedient began to warn the people not to give themselves away and going with the flow of the world's prosperity, but they should have a limit what they do and then promote tabernacling, the forming of holy cities in the world. And then division and the skirmishes began, and the people were then chased down. Most of the people of the time, when then the Messiah stayed with them and he then left, went up, they wanted to establish the land at that time and point and make the world prosperous. Obviously the Shilishim, they had to go away, and the persecution started. The writings were confiscated. Many of those people who were involved with the Messiah, they died, they were murdered. And Yohanan was the last of the Shilishim. He then went as far as northern Africa. That's how far away he had to go out, because there was a huge persecution on the land. So then, as we read then, Yeshua the prophet, chapter 1:8, explains very precisely the land of Cush. You trace back these from the time of Noah, you find Cush. And on the land of Cush, then Yohanan did set up his first holy city, as per the instructions of Moses, and understanding the completion of the spring feast. So Yohanan then set up the camp as per the instructions of Moses, and those who were indicated by the Messiah himself via Ruach HaKodesh, they formed the first sealed and protected and guarded holy city. During this time, the team of Yohanan wrote Hebrews. These then important Megillas that came out of Yohanan's team went to Asia. Where? Because you have the 7 cities over there, they are in sin. Read Galah, Revelation. Were there not 7 cities in Asia Minor? The starting of the holy cities? But they were in sin because they were linked with the world and prosperity. They wanted the prosperity of the land and then part of heaven, but then more of prosperity. And the Messiah said, no, either you are then with one or you are with the other. You can't do both. As Yohanan was far away in northern Africa, then he wrote those Megillas, including Hebrews. And his team had taken them up north, and then the cities of Asia Minor were straightened out. Thus it was for 1,000 years. Then in 1009 the cities were destroyed. 1009 per the regular calendar, to make it easier. Then the New World Order started. They had to come up with some sort of heaven lies, such as when you die to go to heaven, there is no heaven to go to. If we are not obedient to the Torah and to the holy cities, then our souls go straight down where the Messiah said it's not very nice down there. And then came the New World Order. And it was for 1,000 years. Now in 1009 it was a situation. In 2009 it was another situation. The period of deceit has ended. And we are back then on holy instructions, finding out what's going to take place. As we understand, there is a great movement in the Hebraic world because of the holy prophecies are taking place. Then Yeshua the prophet had pointed out that those cities were laid waste for many centuries, they are returning. And the first holy city is on the land of Cush, precisely where Yohanan was at first. From there he delivered those Megillas to those churches who were in sin. They were straightened out. And then the holy city on the land of Cush is then as if you were reading the prototype of the 30s and 90s. The only distinction is, if you turn it a bit, you find 30s and 90s, and Yeshua the prophet, chapter 1:8. If you turn it a bit, you find then Yohanan and the restoration period. These are then the layers that we must be very aware of them, because then we understand what's taking place. But let's then read further, because there are some sections of Daniel extremely important, and these are combat documents. When we read, for instance, from the 11th chapter until the end, you find only combat, as if you were an army reading then from a general's type of memorandum or plans of war, where people die everywhere. This is what we are reading. For instance, when there is then skirmishes, and then let's say for instance then the kingdom of the north will put up a siege mount against the city, fortified city, we are talking of war. When we find then there are skirmishes from the kingdom of the north and kingdom of the south, and you find sections of the kingdom of the south going north, we are talking about war. People die. So the 11th chapter of Daniel is a document that should be in the hands of a general who knows what is coming, so then the least casualties can be then taking place. Now, after much evaluation of the holy documents of the Hebrews, let's understand a section from the first verse through roughly the verse 15. These are nearly translated and decoded. I was able to get these combat orders decoded and plain understanding, place these in the computer. And we already know what's going on with Egypt, what's going to take place with Isol and then the sons of Ishmael, understanding how it's going to take place with the kingdom of the south, understanding with the kingdom of the north, who is coming down then put an end of this war. Understand this entire section. More of these, I understand what's going to take place with the Soviet Union in the future. I understand what's going to take place then later on, when arms and then the violent ones are going to be then joining up to make sure that the establishment of the vision is then put into place. And further down, up to this section, at least a fourth of the 11th chapter is already deciphered and decoded. I truly know what's going to be in the future, step by step. And because of these, what should we then be aware of as far as our own gatherings and readings and instructions? It is crucial, if a congregation wants to be flourishing and then very active as far as understanding the Holy Torah, we should be aware of how Gentiles versus Hebrews should relate with each other. Gentiles are not Hebrews, Hebrews are not Gentiles. Is that a reason they should say they should be divided? No. However, when there is a service, for instance, the Shabbat service, the normal should be the Israelic lineage, or those who are from the lineage, should take the leadership in conducting the service. Those who were grafted later as Gentiles, they should stay behind and listen. This truly is the structure where the Messiah himself and the Creator himself, they have set up. The other day was then in the service, and then for some reason found people that were not from Israelic lineage, yet they were leading then the service. It did not make any sense. So where do we find then specific understandings where we should then read and obey? Very simply, Galah. The 6th chapter gives us a very precise understanding. Gentiles, they should be concerned with the prophecies and those relations related with salvation of the Gentiles. The services are going to be conducted in the holy cities, and those Hebrews who are in the holy cities, and those cities are absolutely secluded, then they exercise the 7 functions. Did not Shaliach Shaul said would have then 7 spirits of Elohim, 7 functions? And then there is a relationship of the holy cities and the outside world. The holy cities are holy, the world is contaminated. So what should those Gentiles involved with the service do? They should step back and let the Hebrews do the job. And Gentiles, they stay behind, they study the holy prophecies, and then they show the layers of these understandings, so then other Gentiles can be grafted. On the 6th chapter of Galah, you find then those who are then making testimony. Those are the testifiers on behalf of the Messiah. Those are the Gentiles. For a Gentile who was then involved with a congregation, it should be more than enough reading the holy instructions, reading the Torah, and understanding the layers, and then testifying on behalf of the Messiah. This truly is the objective of the Gentiles. Now, at some point, if these Gentiles are invited into the holy city, and the first city on the land of Cush, not talking about a service in the morning Shabbat, though we should practice these principles as if a service in a synagogue, for instance, should be considered as a reflection of a holy city. We know it is not, because a holy city requires a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. Yet we should exercise and do what the Messiah and his Father said to do. Gentiles have an objective, and the Hebrews have another objective. So then, explaining these topics of the holy instructions, what should be done? First and the utmost, the Bible of the Gentiles should be upgraded and updated. And please try to find original sources from the Israelic lineage. Later on, I'm going to study more of Daniel, the 11th chapter, because as it is a war document, then these should be translated properly. So then the Gentiles reading these understandings can then testify on behalf of the Messiah properly. because the future is secured under the prophecies of Daniel and Yeshua and the other prophets. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.